Welcome to Dear Business Coach, the podcast. My name's Elizabeth. Find one thing to move your business forward today with conversations, spotlights, interviews, articles, and free resources. Listen and follow and subscribe on social media. Dear Business Coach pages and groups. Dear Business Coach podcast. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and don't forget Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, anywhere you listen to podcasts. All it takes sometimes is one little thing to move your business forward today. And here we go. Yeah. Okay, beautiful. Well, Kambri Crews, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Welcome to the Dear Business Coach podcast. How are you today?
Hi, yeah, that's it. Kambri Crews. I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I would like to look at some profile details that I might already have from you that I know that our followers and listeners can see too. However, the way that I would introduce you is thank you for having me to your theater, the QED Astoria in the Queensboro, New York City. Your theater is famous, and you have been there for a little while, I understand. So, yeah, can you kind of tell me a little bit about who is Kambri Crews? How do you introduce yourself?
Well, I am the owner of QED in Astoria, Queens. It's a multi-purpose venue, but mostly stand-up comedy. And it's been around for over 10 years. We actually just had our 10-year anniversary earlier this year. And I'm in the process of either turning over the reins to someone younger who might be more energized to take it over, or worst case scenario, it will close at the end of the year, beginning of 2025. But I'm cautiously optimistic that I can find somebody to take it over because it would be a shame for the community to lose it. But after 10 years, I'm ready to move on from that for sure. Prior to owning and operating QED, I wrote a memoir about my life called Burned Down the Ground, and it's a New York Times bestseller. And prior to all that, I've been producing and promoting stand-up comedy for 25 years in New York City. I've done marketing and PR campaigns for big brands all over the country, including Jose Cuervo. And I lived on the Cuervo Nation randomly for a couple of years here and there, periodically. And I was an assistant vice president of a bank when I was like 26, and I never went to college. So yeah, I've worn a lot of hats.
Wow, that's amazing. I think when I was getting familiar with the space a little bit before visiting and being in the space to teach a class, I was watching some of the videos, and there's so much material from that space. Did you open that space or start working in that space because of your involvement in stand-up comedy professionally in the production world?
For sure. Yeah, so I in the mid-aughts, like 2006, I started working for a 400-seat theater comedy club in the meatpacking district called Comics, and that's Comics with an X, Comix. And while I was doing production and producing, I was producing shows there, but also promoting and marketing, and noticed that they had an empty space in the basement that wasn't being used. And it was a very small space, but I saw potential in it. So I asked them if I could take it over and do something with it rather than it sit empty. And so I created Ochi's Lounge, which was a little 30-seater, maybe maybe 50 at if we wanted to break all the codes, which we did regularly. But Ochi's Lounge was just this little alternative space, you might call it. And a lot of the big names that were performing upstairs would come down and do a guest spot. I had really, really famous comedians come through, but they weren't famous at the time, like Colin Jost and Pete Holmes and Kumail Nanjiani and Zach Galifianakis and people like that.
Wow.
Although Zach was pretty well known at the time, actually, and Jim Gaffigan used to do guest spots down there all the time. And so it had its reputation. It was a great little fun spot, and it embodied everything that my current iteration QED embodies, which is that this is a place to experiment and have fun, and it's a diverse lineup. But it was basically strictly comedy or variety. Whereas QED is very multi-purpose. Like we have movie screenings and classes range from like your podcasting class that you so generously taught to we've had like ink blot classes and painting, watercoloring, crocheting, how to take a selfie when selfies became kind of there was a whole class on how to take a selfie, silly things like that. But when comics closed, it forced Ochi's to be closed. It closed my space. And then I immediately reopened another little space called Luna Lounge, but the owner was kind of problematic. He harassed um, uh, uh, some female comedians, which is very problematic, obviously, but also he was problematic in that he wasn't a great owner of the space. Like the bathrooms were run down and always out of order. I remember putting Jay Farrow on a show, and Jay had just started with SNL and his star was really rising quickly. And we were all excited to have him in this teeny back room. And it was as small or smaller than Ochi's. And it was raining inside the venue. There was so much water coming from the ceiling that we all had our umbrellas open inside the theater. So one day I showed up to Luna Lounge and the doors were locked and all our equipment was inside. And so it was like, if I'm ever going to pour my heart and soul into a place, it's going to be my own place and on my own terms. And that's when, that's how QED came about. In between that, though, I wrote a memoir and I went on tour with my book. And when the book tour was winding down, I was like, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I'm like, I miss Ochi's. I want Ochi's again. And so I created QED.
Are you a LinkedIn user? If you are, you can join me for LinkedIn Live Audio with Elizabeth every week, usually on Mondays at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I will have a LinkedIn Live Audio where we talk about podcasting for executives who speak and podcasting for team leaders who speak. These are the themes that are currently running. If that sounds like something you're interested, visit me, Elizabeth Walker at Work, on my LinkedIn profile. That's impressive for a lot of reasons. The biggest question that sticks out to me is it sounds like you're aware that going to a multi-purpose space is something you have to make your audience aware of too. So it sounds like it could be something that's challenging and from a marketing perspective, from an operation perspective. However, when I found your theater, you asked me before, had you been here before? I said, no, I actually and I'm an out of towner. So I found your space by basically perusing theaters that I might be able to visit, and yours came up as a multi-purpose space. And I started looking at the classes that you offered, and ironically I thought, well, this is just where I would fit in. This is perfect for
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of QED. Everybody fits in. That's what's great about it. Everybody fits in. There is something literally for everyone. We've had baby shows where the parents are allowed to bring their babies, infants, kind of like movie theaters would have shows where babies are allowed, so that if the babies get fussy or crying or whatever, it won't disturb the other patrons. So we've had first birthday parties and little kids' birthday parties, all the way up to events for seniors, where we've had a seniors meeting for, I think they had board game meetups for seniors, and everything in between. And everything in between can be anything, really. I remember going back to your question about, is it a hard from a marketing standpoint? I remember a few comedy club owners kind of not lecturing me, but being like, oh no, you're doing too much. No, you need to make it XYZ. You need to do XYZ. And of course they're all men, telling me what I should and could do. And it's like, actually, no, I can do this and it'll be fine. I can do whatever I want in the space and it'll be great. Their advice was coming from a well-meaning place of wanting to be like, you're spreading the purpose of the venue too thin, and it's confusing for people. And I'm like, what's confusing about a community art space?
Mm-hmm.
If I were just calling it a comedy club, I could see how that's confusing, but it's not just a comedy club. It's a community art space. It's a gathering place. It's a third place for people to go. We have board game meetups and um, book clubs and all sorts of, like, I have an art club that I host, and drink and draws where we have a live
Mhm.
model and we sketch a model. And so when I was developing the early marketing materials, I called it an after school space for grown-ups. And because I had mentored a girl, her father was in prison, her mother had just gotten out of prison. And so it's like a big brothers and big sisters program, but specifically for children who have been impacted by incarceration. And of course, my father had been in prison. That's what my memoir is about, my relationship with my father. Um, so I felt like that organization was a good fit for me. And I mentored this girl, and I would go and meet her at her after school program to pick her up. And they were always doing something really fun and different every day, from arts and crafts and movie screenings and field trips. And I'm like, I want this, but for me, and I don't
Right.
want kids. so yeah, I call it after school space for grown-ups, and it fits and it works. And I have definitely inspired multi-purpose venues like this to pop up all over the city. So I do feel like I started a little bit of a trend there.
I went into the restroom and I was checking out all of the posters, and of course there are, and I took some pictures, and there are posters of uh, people that I recognize or people that I may not remember their name exactly, but oh, I know that person. Oh, I know that
Right.
person. Oh, I know
Yeah.
that person. Yeah, and so you have won several, or your space has won several awards continuously since you've been there.
Yeah. I think one of the benefits of my long lasting career in stand-up comedy is the relationships that I've developed over the years. Because when I opened QED, it's on the last stop in Astoria, Queens, which if you haven't been to New York, it's not like right in the heart of everything. It's in a vibrant neighborhood, but it is the last stop on the subway line. So it's a destination, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
like you're going to stumble, you're actually going there. And so a few people are like, why would they couldn't believe that I would open a place in Astoria, wondering why would a comedian, especially a well-known comedian, ever go that far to do a spot? And I'm like, well, why wouldn't they? If they've got a stage, they go all over the country to perform. Why wouldn't they come to Queens? It's in their neighborhood, or in their city, I should say. Um, and they can have a warm welcome, a smart audience that appreciates them in a room that has amazing acoustics and a good vibe. And there's low stakes because we only sell 50 tickets. So there's a lot less pressure on them to sell tickets, and uh, which can be challenging in New York. If you're a New York based comedian, uh, you could be a headliner and have trouble selling in New York City because New York City has so much to do and see. And there's so many comedy venues. So to be able to come out to a small venue, be able to sell tickets, and know that there's not any pressure from the venue owner, and you're not going to look bad if you can't sell tickets. It's a positive, right? But
Yes.
my longstanding career has brought with it relationships that I've carried through the years. And when I at the beginning I mentioned that I might be closing at the end of the year because we're at the end of our lease and I'm ready to move on to something else. Um, a few comedians are sad and disappointed, and they're like, oh, this is my whole community is here, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no, your community is you. You are your the building. It is not does not come with the community built in. We made that. And wherever we go, that's where our community is. So it is just a building, but your relationships carry on and on. And so when I first opened, um, to make sure that we made a mark in the community, that we got good press, and that the local people realized that we were serious, that we were a legit and would pay attention to our newsletter, and also to develop my newsletter, because I was starting from scratch with the newsletter too, um, that I wanted to make sure that people signed up for my newsletter and opened it and actually saw that we were legit. So those first few months and first year and a half, I'd say, of QED being open, I called in every favor of every friend that I'd ever helped along the way. Janine Garofalo headlined a show. Cartoon, sorry, TV's Frank from Mystery Science Theater 3000. He had a cartoon dump, and there are rabid Mystery Science Theater fans, and they just couldn't believe that TV's Frank Conniff was going to be in their neighborhood in Astoria. My friend Brian Tucker was the head writer for SNL for many years. I think then he became a co-head writer, or I think now he's just writing on the show because his kids and things change or whatever. But I contacted Brian and I was like, would you be willing and able to put together an SNL showcase show? And he did a few SNL showcase shows over the years. And it was literally every single famous person on the show would come out and do a tiny spot at this tiny little spot. And they would do a set. Kate McKinnon, Leslie Jones, Jay Farrow again, all these people. It was Pete Davidson, so many more that all performed. So yeah, and that's when people saw the SNL show and they were like, and saw that it sold out, and I was like, and they couldn't believe that it was happening at QED, and they're like, how did it sell out so quickly? And I was like, well, were you on the newsletter? No. Well, join the newsletter. And so my from 0 to 1,000 pretty quickly, and now it's at over 17,000.
I saw that. Yeah. So you figured out the secret to FOMO, right? If you want to know,
yeah. There for marketing and newsletter tips, I have a few, but for your newsletter, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this, but it's worth repeating, that you have to offer something to incentivize people to open it and to subscribe to your newsletter in the first place, to open it and actually read it. And so I have built in special things like that over the years. Like I've got Gary Gulman has a regular show at QED every month, and he's pretty famous now, and people want to see him, but they know that it will sell out. So they have to subscribe to my newsletter to get the first dibs, the first info, on the ticket link. Or I'll offer free tickets. For example, if I had 2 tickets to Gary, he's going to be on Broadway in January. He's going to have an off-Broadway run. So let's say I have 2 tickets to see him, and I'll raffle those off, but you have to be on the newsletter in order to enter the raffle, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, or, and that's worth it. And it's worth it. And it's worth it. And you have that access. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah. There's all sorts of ways you can incentivize your newsletter, no matter who you are,
Well, I thank you for sharing that. You're right. It is worth repeating and worth revisiting, even if we've heard this before. And you said that you called in every favor. I'm thinking of all these wonderful people that you have listed off. And obviously those are folks that it's not just a name drop. That relationship came from somewhere. So I imagine you have helped a lot of people along the way too. Any secret stories there?
Oh gosh, there's too many to name, because also that's honestly what I love doing the most is helping promote and bringing people together for shows and events is my specialty and what I find the most joy in. And Um, Making sure everyone feels welcome, but also that people who maybe haven't gotten the attention that they deserve are highlighted or whatever. Um, I think most recently I helped Erin McGuire get her first album with 800 Pound Gorilla, which she filmed at QED, and we host New York Comedy Festival shows, which I help select for the festival. So to give a comedian a credit on the New York Comedy Festival is kind of a big deal, you know. That's exciting, and to be able to share that opportunity with friends and people that I admire and respect is a privilege, you know. Um, I'm trying to think in the past. I've done so much PR for people. Ophira Eisenberg was a long.
Hey, listeners, don't forget to subscribe to email if you haven't already. Do this at dearbusinesscoachpodcast.com. And if you are a new subscriber, look for the magazine coming up. You can get a free download as a new subscriber. That's dearbusinesscoachpodcast.com. Thanks so much, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember, you are a superstar.
Time client of mine a long time ago, and she's so great. And still friends with her, and she's gone on to NPR and so many other things. And yeah, there's so many different people over the years. I can't even think of after we hang up, of course, is when I'll remember.
Right. So you probably have another memoir in the future. I have to find this book of yours and read this memoir. And because I had no idea. Did you plan on writing that when you did?
I had always wanted to tell my story. It's such a dramatic story, but it was always also very traumatizing. And it wasn't until I created Ochi's Lounge when I was really immersed in alternative comedy, because I had always been around stand-up comedy and I'd been producing and promoting that. But in alternative comedy, that's where you really see people trying out new material, and maybe material that's a little edgy or sensitive or difficult discussion topics like death and abuse and suicide and things like that, and turning it into funny material. So in Ochi's, there was a woman, a writer. She's pretty well known now, Sarah Benincasa. She had a show called The Family Hour, and I was the resident cousin. So it was just people telling um, family stories. You know, it was a storytelling show like The Moth or whatever. And so she dubbed me, like, she was Auntie Sarah and I was the resident cousin or something like that. And so every month on her show I would tell a different story, and that's where I was able to really kind of just dip my toes into the waters of talking about this really difficult material, finding humor in it, and seeing if there was anything worth sharing there, you know. And so I would either I would write the story and then perform it, or I would perform it and then come home and transcribe it. And after doing that for some time, I was able to develop some blog entries and things like that, and just started doing The Moth and other booked comedy shows elsewhere in the city. And that's where I really started to hone my voice in talking about this stuff. But do you want? I'll give you my elevator pitch. Would that?
Yeah.
Would that help? My book. So
Yes.
I I grew up hearing in a deaf family, and we lived in a one-room tin shed with no running water and no electricity. And at one point in my teens, my father tried to kill my mother, an event that I witnessed and intervened in. And then years later, when I was living in New York City, he tried to kill another woman, um, a crime for which he was sentenced to 20 years in a Texas prison. So I'm a CODA, child of deaf adults. There's immense poverty, abuse, violence. Oh, yeah. So it's a lot. So naturally, I got into comedy, right?
That's what they say. And also I recently was thinking about a woman who I heard in an interview. She's an author. The person interviewing her recounted something very traumatic she'd expressed in a book that became very popular. And she said in that interview that, actually I used the writing as a technical way of processing the trauma, regardless of what
Right.
happened for the book successfully in the marketplace. And I haven't heard that you have writing, experience before, but this process that you just outlined, going from stage, not even, or production, not even just, you just said two different things, right? Sometimes you would tell the story and then transcribe it, and then sometimes you would use a story and then perform it, and then both of those things could turn into, for you, blog material. And then you said you actually, now you're taking that again, you're going to the stage and you're going to mock storytelling. I mean, this is fascinating. Did you know what you were doing?
Yeah, sort of. I kind of did, but I didn't realize that, oh, this is actually a really thoughtful process. It wasn't until I'd already written the manuscript and had sold it. Well, actually, I sold the nonfiction book proposal, then wrote the manuscript. And it was in the PR and marketing phase where they were asking me to get blurbs for my book. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh, for fun, I'll just reach out to Judy Blume, even though this isn't really a kind of book that she would or should blurb. I mentioned her in the book, and I've always admired and loved her. So I was like, shoot, why not? I'll just shoot her an email. And it was on her website that she talked about reading and talking out loud as a way of helping write dialogue and stuff. And it was like, oh, I've been doing that this whole time. I didn't know. And
Yeah.
another a book that I actually found very, very helpful, because I don't even consider myself a writer, which sounds ridiculous to say considering it's a New York Times bestseller, but I really
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you. I uh, I read Stephen King's On Writing, which has been
Hmm.
around now for so many years, and so many people recommend it, and I'll just join the chorus. It's really, I highly, highly recommend it. It helped just elevate my writing, and make it less purpley prose and all that. Um, uh, and I think my book, I wrote it in a very matter of fact, straightforward way, partly because it's also about and for the deaf community. And English, spoken English, is a second language for deaf folks. And so I wanted it to be in an accessible reading level, not like dumbed down. I don't mean to say anything like that, but just that uh it's easier to read for someone where English is a second language, and that was important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that I have to be mindful of your time, because I will keep talking to you. And then I don't know if you have another appointment coming up. I want to make sure to not skip over anything that you would like to highlight. The book, the title of your book again is Burning It Down,
Burn down the ground.
Burn Down the Ground. And that is
Yeah.
by you, that is authored under your name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Burning Down the Ground by Kambri
Burn,
Crews, and the New York Seller Best Time List. I can
burn,
find that.
burn down the ground.
Burn
Just
Down the
burn down.
Ground. So I need to know, are you allowed to tell me about your coming plans? What's next for you?
I don't know. I don't know what's next for me. And that's kind of, there's the beauty in it is I need a break. I went through 10 years of QED. Running and operating a brick and mortar store in New York City is no joke. And I did it entirely by myself from scratch. So, I mean, like I mentioned, the newsletter, my mailing list was at zero. And, coming up with the Christmas holidays, I'm about to drag out all these decorations. And I realized I had nothing. I didn't even have, just standard bar stuff. So I went from 0 to 100 by myself and built this amazing space that was built with so much love and care, and it's obvious. And we won like best comedy venue in all of New York City. We beat out like Gotham and Caroline's and The Cellar, all these very, very famous, big, well-known, globally known venues. And QED was voted number one. And, that's pretty special and cool. And um, so but all throughout these last 10 years, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which I went through. Actually, I have, you asked about another appointment. Right after this, I have to go see my oncologist. So I went through cancer. And then, of course, the pandemic, which just decimated the arts industry. And I built it back after the pandemic. In New York City, venues weren't allowed to have ticketed shows for 14 months. So I had to start again and rebuild, and not necessarily from scratch this time, because I did at least have a mailing list and I had Christmas decorations, but it was definitely a long, slow crawl out of that well, and built it back. And now we're back here, and I reached the end of my 10-year lease, and I'm like, you know what? I want a break. Everybody got that break during the pandemic to make sourdough and learn new crafts. I want to do that.
Your turn.
I want my pandemic projects. But truthfully, I know me. I don't sit around and gather dust. I started learning how to ice skate when I was 50, when I turned 50. And I've now doing that for a couple of years. And I love ice skating so much. And I'm like, hell, maybe I'll start going and competing in ice skating. I taught myself how to watercolor through YouTube videos. And turns out I'm actually kind of really great at watercoloring, which I had no idea of talent. So I'm like, maybe I'll just become a watercolorer. I don't know, color artist. But those are fun hobbies for me, but not my career, obviously. But truthfully, I'll probably continue to work in comedy as a producer and a promoter. I Not being tethered to a brick and mortar store will very much allow me to explore the city more and do the events that I love doing, but without the pressure and stress of being the venue owner. And um, I have another book in me, at least, about my career and how to open a space like QED, but also as maybe a follow-up after my book ends with my father being sentenced in prison. Spoiler alert. It's in the opening chapter too. We know he's in jail, right?
Okay.
But he then spent 20 years in prison. So I could do a follow-up about that process and our relationship and how it developed while he was in prison. And then he ended up dying in prison during the COVID pandemic.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was pretty ugly and terrible, but kind of classic Texas justice. So I'm not surprised. But so there's a lot to explore as far as writing another book. Also, my book never became an audiobook because audiobooks weren't really a thing at the time. And after my hardcover came out, Penguin and Random House merged. And as a result of that merger, my audiobook never got made. My paperback never got made either. So it's like to maybe get the rights back to that so that I could publish a paperback and make an audiobook for it. I've had it been optioned a few times by an Oscar-winning actress. Actually, after I hang up, I've got an email from an Oscar-winning screenwriter who wants to develop it, but he knows about the actress, so we got to talk to them.
Yeah.
So, but that's been 10 years of having people interested in making something and nothing ever coming of it. So I always, it's fun to say out loud that somebody like an Oscar winner has optioned my book, but really it's like, yeah, it usually that's where it ends. So,
well, that's you know how to make it happen if you want it to. It's what I would expect.
Well, that's like tied down to QED.
Right.
I've never been able to really focus any attention on that. So I never even follow up on an email to be like, hey, what's going on with the option? Or is there anything I can do to further this along? What can I help with? I don't have the capacity for that. And so being freed from QED would be great for that reason.
Yeah. Well, I think I have to let you go. And I know that you have very important things to take care of today. And I want to, I guess, wrap up with saying, I can't believe I got this interview with you today because I didn't know that that your lease is up at QED and that other things are happening for you. And I feel like I just got a chance to catch a celebrity before
Yeah,
before you're off on your jet to the next thing, Kambri. Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Yeah, you're not going to be the one to like break the news. I shared an Instagram video yesterday, so check that out. So I announced the news yesterday, so now I can freely talk about it today. So
Okay. Well,
but yeah.
and so I'm looking out for your next book. And in the meantime, can I continue to follow you and what is coming next on Instagram, or where should I do that?
Yeah, at Kambri C on Instagram. That's KAMBRIC. And on Facebook, I'm just Kambri. On Blue Sky, I'm just Kambri. Um, Unfortunately, on Instagram, somebody had gotten Kambri and they don't even use it. I think they just like
Oh,
snapped it, to try to own the name. But so that's a bummer. My website is under construction. It's there. It's still there. There's like a landing page, but it's cambricrews.com. And then, of course, I'm hopeful that QED will continue on with somebody else as the owner. And the person I'm in chats with about it, plan to keep it as QED is now. And so I would encourage you to come see a show before we close in January or February, or hopefully it'll still be around. And that is at QED Astoria.
yes. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And you know what? I hope we can catch up again at some point and highlight the next adventure for you. I appreciate your time and thank you again for letting me experience your theater.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your time and your talents with your class. And yeah, I love meeting people and bringing people together and everything. So I'm grateful for your time and that you and I got to chat today. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Exciting. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Elizabeth in Floyd, Virginia. This has been an episode of Dear Business Coach.